The bell rang once. A hollow, ancient sound, swallowed by the fog that clung like breathless spirits to the village of Talmir. It echoed not through air, but through bones, the kind of chime that lived in marrow, that made fingers clench without reason, that made even the wind hesitate. The peasants knelt in the frost-bitten mud, silence wrapped around them like old wool threadbare, shivering, devout. Breath bloomed white in the cold. No one moved, no one dared. Upon the wooden dais, slick with dew and judgment, stood the accused, barefoot, bound, alone. The rope bit her wrists, rough as bark, coarse as the whispers that had festered, like rot in the taverns and church pews. Her eyes did not search the crowd. They stared upward, toward the rusted iron cage suspended above, a relic of older punishments, older sins, older gods. She had been midwife and healer once, known for the sweetness of her voice, the calm of her hands. But the child had not survived its first breath, and the mother now lay beneath stone. Grief had no logic. It needed blame. So they whispered. Said she spoke to roots that bled red, sang to the winds, walked alone, where old stones stood crooked in the hills. That she soothed pain with herbs not found in the bishop's garden, and that was enough. Now before monks cloaked in shadow and a bishop drunk on incense, she was not woman. She was suspicion, wrapped in skin. The ordeal was simple. Water would judge her, as God would guide it. If she floated, she was held aloft by the devil. If she sank innocent, a holy paradox. Two monks approached her now, faces hidden beneath damp hoods, in their hands, a stone heavy as sorrow, veined with iron and centuries. They tied it to her waist with a sash once white, now soaked in the blood of others who came before. The knot was ritual, not mercy. The cold seeped deeper. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her lips parted, and a psalm spilled forth in a trembling rhythm, each word trailing mist. It was not a plea. It was not defiance. It was the only thing she had left that was hers. The pond waited, still as death, its surface unbroken, save for the feathered breath of the morning wind. A mirror, dark and deep, reflecting the face of belief twisted beyond salvation. She was led forward, one step at a time, each board of the dais creaking like coffins in the earth. From the crowd, a soft sob broke the silence. A girl, face hidden beneath a veil, soaked with salt and thyme, her sister, helpless, unheard. She clutched the edge of a cloak as if it were a lifeline, knuckles white with desperation. The priest muttered something in Latin, a benediction tainted by fear, but even he looked away when they lowered her into the pond. The rope unwound slowly, like time itself hesitated to continue. The first touch of water sent a gasp through the crowd, not hers, theirs. She merely shivered, lips still moving, psalms dissolving into ripples, and then she sank. The stone pulled, gravity and judgment braided together. Her gown floated around her like a ghost mourning itself, hair unfurled in slow motion, fingers spread, eyes closed. The pond swallowed her, and then stillness, no bubbles, no sound, just silence thicker than prayer. A minute passed, then two. A murmur began in the crowd, low as thunder beneath the skin. Was she gone? Was that purity? Was that death? And then movement, a sudden plume of bubbles, a thrashing beneath the glassy surface. She rose not by will, not by swimming, but caught in a cruel dance between weight and buoyancy. The stone had slipped from her side, its knot loosened in the water's cold fingers, or so some would later whisper, cut by a sharper force. Her body broke the surface, gasping like a newborn, eyes wild with frost and fury. She floated. The air turned to knives. The crowd surged. Someone cried out, "Witch!" Another fell to their knees, face pressed to the dirt. The priest made the sign of the cross with trembling hands. The bishop turned pale, his power unraveling like the hem of his robe. She coughed, spitting pond water and psalms. Her eyes met her sister's, and in that moment, the veil lifted, not the one on her face, but the one over truth. The villagers did not see a devil, they saw a woman who would not drown for their comfort, A woman returned from beneath the surface, not broken, but burning, and yet proof was proof. She floated, and so they dragged her from the pond, dripping and shivering, and bound her once more. This time, the chains were iron, a fire would be prepared, dry wood stacked beneath the ancient oak, and though the law declared her guilty, doubt spread like ink in water. The girl in the crowd stood taller now, veil lowered, eyes lit with rage. She would not scream, not yet, but she would not forget. As the torches were lit and the villagers dispersed like frightened birds, the fog thickened. It wrapped the village in silence again, but it could not swallow what had been seen. The bell did not ring a second time, it had spoken, and in its echo, something ancient stirred, a crack in faith, a splinter in the old laws. The pond stilled, the cage above the dais swayed slightly in the wind, and somewhere, deep in the woods beyond the chapel walls, a crow cried once and was answered. The girl turned her face to the smoke curling above the oak, and whispered a name. The story was not over, it had only just begun. Smoke clings to the rafters like the breath of ghosts. It coils in solemn spirals above a room where time itself seems held by invisible chains. The torchlight flickers, casting long, dancing shadows that whisper along the cold stone walls. The flames do not warm. They accuse. In the center of the hall, a man kneels, his dignity torn, his name fading into silence. His blindfold is damp with blood and sweat, the bruises on his face blooming like ink in water. His once proud armor has been stripped, replaced with coarse wool and iron shackles. Around him, cloaked figures murmur in Latin droning prayers that sound more like spells. Their hoods obscure their eyes, but their judgment weighs heavy in the smoke. Before him, 3 relics rest atop a slab of oaken stone: a dagger, cruel and beautiful, once said to have severed the hand of a heretic in a single breath; a feather, pale and trembling, taken from the tomb of Saint Audran, where pilgrims swear it glows on moonless nights; and the Book of Hours, bound in leather blacker than pitch, its pages said to weep blood when opened by the wicked. The accused does not speak. He cannot. The ritual forbids it. Words in this room are echoes of the dead. He was a nobleman, once. A lord with lands and laughter. Now he kneels accused of the most silent of betrayals, regicide by poison. No witness, no parchment of confession. Only the soft rumors that crept like rot through the court, until his name was carried on the wind like ash. They say he cursed the king's bread, that in the kitchens of dawn, he slipped a vial between crust and grace, and watched as death baked golden beneath a royal seal. But the truth died with the baker, who vanished the next day, his apron found floating in the moat, stained red and stiff as bark. The court demanded proof. None came, so they called for divine revelation. He was brought to the Cathedral of Saints, his wrists bound in chain prayers. He did not beg, he did not resist. When asked his final confession, he only whispered, "The truth has never been welcome in the halls of kings." The relics await his hand. His fingers hover, trembling, not from fear alone, but from memory raw and wet like an open wound. He sees his mother again, her hands brushing the dust from his tunic the day he was knighted. She warned him, voice low and bitter, never to trust oaths sworn over wine or offered under torches. Courts are built on silence, she said. The louder the truth, the faster it drowns. Now in this place of shadowed stone and choking incense, he must choose. One relic holds innocence, one holds doom, the third silence itself. He weeps, not for his life, but for the moment before the touch, when all things remain unbroken. The second before the fall, he chooses. His fingers close around the feather. It is soft, impossibly light, yet it burns. Not in fire, but in the weightless pain of hope. The hall does not breathe. The inquisitors bow. They make no proclamation. There is no cheer, no gasps, no release. Only the whispering of robes, the low hum of torches. The ritual is done. He is led away, and the relics remain. 3 days pass. The king's court resumes its cruel clockwork. Jesters return, goblets clink, whispers grow quiet, until the fourth dawn, when a scream breaks the stillness of the castle. They find him in his chamber, sprawled across the stone floor, his mouth open mid-prayer, his eyes glassy with terror. Blood pools beneath his bed, slow and thick, like wine poured in morning. No blade, no wound, just crimson. As if his body had remembered something the mind could not bear. The feather lies untouched in the cathedral. The dagger waits. The book of hours remains shut. Whispers return, louder now. They say the saints still speak, but only the guilty ever seem to hear. Monks scrub the stones of the hall, though no blood ever fell there. Still, they scrub, day after day, as if guilt has a scent that clings to the pores of walls. The nobles grow restless. If innocence can be swallowed by silence, what protection remains? They look to their relics now with unease, as if each object bears its own hunger. They whisper of cursed tests, of divine cruelty masquerading as justice. But the inquisitors remain unshaken. To them, the saints spoke, and were obeyed. In the weeks that follow, another man is summoned, this one a steward whose ledger bore discrepancies that only the dead could explain. He too is blindfolded. He too is made to kneel. The feather lies before him, and this time it glows. A new fear takes hold in the kingdom, not of war, nor famine, nor plague, but of judgment without appeal. For the saints are watching, and their silence is never empty. Beneath all this, the court shifts. Power slides like oil across marble. The highborn draw their cloaks tighter, their tongues sharper, loyalties fray in secret. The relics have become instruments, not of faith, but of leverage. And still, the book remains shut. But not for long, because beyond the hills, a storm gathers, one not of rain, but of iron and fire. A claimant to the throne, a girl with frost in her eyes, and the blood of exiles in her veins, marches with banners made of torn scripture and weapons, blessed by no priest. She believes no saint will save them, only the blade, and in the cathedral, as another torch dies in its bracket, a monk dares touch the book. It opens, the ink is still wet, and the next chapter begins. A scream does not always shatter the air. Sometimes it is silent, coiled in the throat, like a snake, denied its strike. That was the sound that wrapped around the village of Lorne that morning. Not the shriek of a woman, not the cry of a child, but something more suffocating, the silence of inevitability. The church bell had not stopped tolling. It rang like a cracked heart in the sky, its sound bleeding through the barley fields, where stalks bowed like penitents in prayer. Above them, the clouds moved low and fast, chasing something they couldn't catch. Wind whispered through the barley like it knew a secret, and had no mouth to speak it. At the heart of the village stood the oak, older than stone, older than scripture, older than the sin they believed they were about to purge. Its bark, blackened by time and weather, rose like a pillar of judgment. Beneath its canopy, the table waited splintered, ancient, and stained with more than just wine or bread. Today it bore the shape of a woman bound and broken not by chains, but by belief. Ash smeared her cheeks like war paint. Her arms were stretched taut along the wood, her wrists wrapped in coarse hemp as if the village feared even her dying breath might carry a curse. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not with pleading that had long since passed, but with a hollow defiance, the kind born from knowing your name has been rewritten in other people's fear. She had no family left to weep, just a raven, and a priest. The ritual was older than the prayers they whispered, and the laws they pretended to uphold. A relic of some ancient dread sown into the roots of Christendom like a weed that would not die. She was to speak the Lord's Prayer, backward, word for word, while a raven watched. If the bird cried before she finished, her soul was condemned. Not because of the bird, but because it was said God would instruct his creatures to signal evil. That was the story they clung to. That was the story they would kill for. The priest held a candle above her face. The wax dripped slowly, tickling her temple like the counting of seconds before a final breath. His eyes held no hatred, only duty, that cruelest of justifications. He murmured scripture under his breath, but even his voice sounded hollow, like he feared the words would hear themselves and recoil. Then came the cage. A boy carried it forward, no more than 10, his hands trembling, eyes red from sleeplessness or guilt. The raven inside shifted on its perch, feathers slick with rain or morning dew, no one could tell. Its eyes glinted like coals buried deep in a dying fire. The priest nodded. The crowd took a collective breath and forgot to let it go. She began, "Rivai, Eva," her voice cracked. The words, when reversed, tasted foreign, like poison swallowed in syllables, each one bent backward like a bone broken on purpose. The Lord's Prayer, meant to bring comfort, now turned into a curse she had to chant herself into. The crowd leaned closer, as if waiting for the devil to rise out of her mouth, but the devil did not come. Instead, a child began to cry. A girl in the front, her fingers clutching her mother's skirt like a drowning hand reaching for shore. The mother said nothing, just tightened her grip. Halfway through the prayer, the raven screeched. It was not a loud sound, not thunder, not anguish, just a single sharp noise that cut the air like a blade slipped between ribs. Enough to stop the prayer, enough to silence even the bell. The woman froze, the priest stepped back. No one spoke. This was not justice. It was performance, and the performance had ended. The audience, unsure whether to applaud or weep, simply lowered their eyes and turned their backs. A sentence had been spoken, though no mouth moved, and the woman, no longer struggling, closed her eyes as if to sleep. Somewhere in the barley, the wind stirred, rising like smoke from an unseen fire, curling through the village, wrapping itself around the limbs of the ancient oak. The candle flickered once, then twice, then died. The villagers scattered, quietly, efficiently, as if guilt could not follow those who walked fast enough. The boy who had carried the raven's cage stood frozen. The bird inside no longer cried. It simply watched, and watched, and watched. The priest remained. Just for a moment, his hands trembling now too. He knelt and pressed 2 fingers to her neck, not to check for life, but to fulfill a ritual of his own. A ritual of certainty. Then he too was gone, leaving only the table, the ropes, and the silence. But Lorne is not a village that forgets. That night, the church bell did not ring. That night, the wind blew westward toward the woods, toward the river, toward the lands that still whispered of old gods and deeper truths. And with it went a sound. A whisper, the final word she'd failed to speak aloud. It rose not from her lips, but from the bark of the oak, from the wood of the table, from the ground that drank her fear and memory. Not all magic is loud. Some of it is buried in roots. Some of it waits. And somewhere beyond the barley fields, in a clearing lit only by starlight, a second raven took flight. Its wings silent as judgment. Its path unknown. And tomorrow, as the sun rises over Lorne's trembling fields, something will be missing. A sound, a warmth, a certainty. Or perhaps, a bell. And somewhere deeper in the woods, the next chapter waits, not with a trial, but with a journey. One that leads into exile, into fire, into a rebellion no one dares name aloud. Yet, the candle is lit. A single flame, no taller than a dragonfly's wing, dances atop the beeswax, its scent thick with frankincense and judgment. It wavers but does not falter, not yet. The nave of the monastery is a cavern of shadows and breathless hush. Vaulted arches stretch above like the ribs of a slumbering beast, and the winter wind claws at the stained glass, denied entry. Here, beneath cold stone and holy silence, the trial begins not with shouts nor decrees, but with a boy's trembling fingers. He is no more than 14 summers, and yet the weight he bears rivals that of kings. A page, once bright-eyed, now mute, by choice or curse, no one knows. His only crime, being present when the Baron fell dead, clutching his goblet and gasping for air. Poison, they whispered. Treason, they dared. And in the absence of explanation, suspicion filled the void like smoke in a sealed chamber. Now, he stands at the foot of the nave, where torches weep down ancient stone, their glow unable to warm the air. The monks have gathered hoods low, hands folded, watching with eyes that have seen martyrdom and miracle alike. At the altar stands the abbot, flanked by scribes and priests, their gazes as stern as the relics behind them. This is the trial of the blessed flame. The boy's task is sacred and cruel. Carry the consecrated candle from the nave to the altar. If the flame endures, he is innocent. If it dies, his soul is forfeit. The walk is 30 paces, but each step is a lifetime. He lifts the candle, it shudders in his grasp. His hands are chapped from frost, bandaged where he scraped them, collecting wood for fires that never quite reached him. A mop of soot-colored hair falls over his brow, eyes wide and gray like a storm-swept sky. He begins to walk. Each footfall echoes, a hollow drumbeat in a tomb of stone. The monks do not speak. The flame is the only witness now. Outside, snow begins to fall, flakes swirling like ash from an unseen pyre. The forest beyond the abbey is silent, save for the creaking of bare branches and the far-off cry of a raven. Winter is tightening its grip, as if the world itself holds its breath for the boy's fate. He reaches the midpoint. The flame dance alive, but restless. A breeze, faint and treacherous, stirs from the side chapel. No one notices, no one moves. But the boy feels it on his skin, in his bones. His foot wavers. He catches himself. One monk flinches, another closes his eyes, as if already mourning. In the boy's mind, memory stirs. He is no longer in the nave, but in the monastery garden last spring, kneeling in dirt, planting wild flowers for the Virgin's statue. He had no voice to offer prayer, so he offered beauty instead. A silent devotion. A vow. He takes another step. The candle flickers. The altar is close now. 10 paces. 5. Then his heel catches the uneven stone. He stumbles. The flame flutters, then dies. Silence devours the hall. It is not broken by gasps or cries, only the soft exhale of finality, as if the building itself has made its judgment. The boy stares at the wick, blackened, cold. He does not weep. His lips part, but no sound comes. His chest rises and falls in quiet surrender. The abbot lowers his gaze. The scribes dip quills in ink. A verdict must be written. But among them, one old scribe does not move. He watches the boy with eyes heavy with years and memories. He remembers another winter. A much younger boy, mute even then, leaving wild flowers every morning before dawn. Every petal arranged with aching care. A child who knew not how to speak, but understood how to honor. The scribe's hand trembles. He closes his book and rises. No one stops him. He walks slowly, past the altar, past the panel of priests, past even the abbot's silent warning glance. He kneels beside the boy, and takes the candle from his hand. Then, from his own robe, he draws a flint and steel. With aching precision, he strikes until the wick catches again. The flame rises brighter, steadier, and in a voice unused for years, the old scribe speaks. This is not judgment, this is the breath of winter. The monks murmur, startled more by the man's voice than the words. He had not spoken since the fire in the East Wing, decades ago. Since he lost his brother in smoke and blame. He lifts the candle high, shielding it from the wind. Then he walks the boy to the altar himself, step by step, slow and deliberate. The flame does not die. The abbot says nothing. His silence too becomes its own kind of verdict. The candle is placed on the altar, and something in the monastery shifts, not in law, nor decree but in the quiet marrow of its bones. A scribe has broken rank, a flame has been relit. A boy still lives. Outside, snow thickens, but for a moment, the cold feels less cruel. Later, the boy is led not to the gallows, but to the refectory. Bread and broth, a fire, a room with light. He sits by the hearth. A monk brings him parchment and charcoal. For the first time, he writes, only 2 words, "Thank you." And as the fire crackles, as the shadows flicker and bend, the old scribe returns to his chamber. He places a fresh page in his ledger, and begins to write anew, not verdicts, but stories. The monastery sleeps, but beneath its silence, something stirs a question, unanswered. If truth must burn to be seen, who decides which flames are sacred, and which are sacrifice? The candle on the altar burns still, its light will not last the night, but for now, it glows, and somewhere beyond the cloister walls, the ravens circle again, as if bearing witness to a soul not condemned, but spared. And in the forest, a second trial begins. A winter wind curls through the abbey ruins of St. Brana's hold, weaving through broken arches and moss-cloaked stone, like a breath held too long. The wind does not howl here, it sings, and if one listens closely, not with the ears, but with that ancient instinct that once feared fire and worshipped stars, one might hear the echo of a woman's hymn, rising from beneath the earth. Her name was Agneta. She had not sinned, nor strayed, nor defied the creed of her order. She had only heard, or so she claimed. The first whisper came in the hour before matins, when frost coated the chapel floor, and the oil in the lamp sputtered against the cold. Agneta had been kneeling in silence, lips chapped, eyes closed, and then, like the soft cracking of ice on a still pond, she said she heard angels, not with words, but with a sound that hummed inside the marrow of her bones. The bishop did not believe her, neither did the crown's envoys, who sat in velvet and suspicion. No woman, least of all a cloistered nun, was permitted revelations unfiltered by male authority. But her voice did not waver. She insisted that something holy had passed through her, that she had seen light without flame, that names not spoken in centuries had folded themselves into her prayers. To test her purity, they did not turn to fire or blade. They chose the old rite, more cruel in its piety, the cloistered fast. 7 days sealed beneath the abbey, 7 days in the crypt. They brought her down stone steps, slick with moss, past walls where time had peeled away the paint of martyrdom. The door groaned on its rusted hinge, iron and oak, older than the oldest grave within. It closed behind her like a judgment. No candle was left for her. Only one had burned briefly as they withdrew, casting long shadows over skeletal saints, and the worn granite of tomb lids carved with unreadable Latin. Her world became darkness, and breath, and memory. On the second night, the snow above thickened, muting the world, but in the crypt, Agneta sang, softly at first, a melody she did not remember learning. It floated like incense through the bones, curling into empty eye sockets and broken rib cages. By the third, her voice changed, lower, foreign, a chant older than her mother tongue. She spoke the names of angels no priest had taught her. She whispered them into the cracks of the walls, her fingers bleeding as she traced sigils into the damp stone. On the 5th day, the abbey dogs began to howl. One by one they raised their muzzles to the dark, not in fear, but in mourning. The old sacristan swore he saw light from beneath the crypt door pale, flickering, like moonlight through milk. When the 7th dawn broke, the bishop came with soldiers, not to welcome her into grace, but to confirm madness, to end a rumor before it birthed rebellion. The door creaked open, the torchlight flickered across cold stone, and there she sat, not collapsed, not weeping, but upright, composed. Her eyes, those same eyes that once wept quietly at the suffering of orphans, were now blind, the irises milk white, veined with gold. She did not look at them. She could not. In her lap lay a dove, limp, feathers speckled with ash, as though it had fallen from the sky into fire. Her hands cradled it with tenderness, as if it were still breathing. I named him Gideon, she said, voice hollow, for he spoke of battles yet to come. The bishop stepped forward. She turned her face to him, not in defiance, but in unbearable stillness. They are not angry, she whispered, but they are waiting. He ordered silence. No record was written. The scribes were forbidden to speak her name. The nuns who had once sung beside her were dispersed to other abbeys. Her body, though still warm, was taken and hidden. None were told where. The crypt was sealed again, this time not as trial, but tomb. But the abbey would not forget. The years wore on. Wars came and went. The chapel fell into disuse. Then ruin. Ivy choked the altar. Wind broke the stained glass. Yet the crypt remained untouched, its door neither rusting nor crumbling, as though time itself feared entry. Locals began to avoid the place, not from fear but reverence wrapped in dread. On certain nights, cold ones, when the moon hid and the stars felt farther than usual, children would speak of songs beneath the earth. Women said their dreams smelled of myrrh and snow. And when a dove died near the abbey gates, one too white, too soft for the hard northern winds, the old remembered Agneta. Some say she was mad, that starvation made saints of the damned, that her blindness was sickness, not salvation. But others believe the angels did come, that they whispered to her in a language not meant for men, that she became a vessel for a truth too pure, too terrible, for the church to own. She was not a martyr, nor a heretic. She was a question, and like all true questions, they buried her deep. Now when snow curls through St. Brana's hold, and the wind finds its way past broken arch and shattered nave, something stirs in the crypt, not a voice, not a hymn, but a breath, as if the stones themselves remember her, as if the dead still kneel in the dark, listening. And so we move forward, past the abbey, into a world grown colder, where silence becomes a tool of power, where holy women are made ghost, and revelation is punished with burial. Yet in distant corners of the realm, others begin to whisper, not of Agneta by name, but of voices in the wind, of fire without flame, of women who will not be sealed. And somewhere beneath snow and time, a dead dove turns to dust in the lap of a forgotten saint. The basilica breathed like a dying beast. Torchlight flickered along the nave of St. Eldrick, casting molten halos on saints carved in stone. Each flame swayed, as if in mourning, bowing to the gravity of what was about to unfold. The walls, once gilded with gold leaf and sacred psalms, now wept with soot and silence. The hour of judgment had come not in scrolls or speech, but in fire. They called it the trial of the Iron Crown. The steps of the accused echoed like drums of war upon the basilica floor. Shackled, swaying, shadowed, Sir Dane of Velmore entered the holy chamber, a man undone. Once the shield of the northern frontier, lion of the order, and keeper of vows, he now stood stripped of every symbol he bore, his crimson tabard replaced by sackcloth, his sword gone, his sigil erased. Only blood clung to him, oozing slowly from the wound beneath his ribs, the work of a blade wielded in betrayal. Whispers swirled like smoke around the pillars. Treason, they hissed. Conspiracy, heresy. The tongues of men who once knelt before him now spat curses behind cupped hands. But no defense would be spoken, no case would be pleaded, for this was not a court of law, it was a fire, and fire had no patience for words. At the altar, the Iron Crown waited, blackened, barbed, and ancient. Its metal had been folded in the fires of elder monasteries, said to carry judgment itself within its core. 3 hours it had lain upon coals, each moment searing it deeper into holy heat. Now it glowed with the color of venging gree, and alive. The high priest stepped forth, his hands trembling beneath his robes. He did not speak. He simply nodded, and the guards shoved Dane to his knees. Ash coated the altar like snow fallen in war, the scent of burnt myrrh and blood fused into something almost unholy. The priest reached for a vial of anointing oil, fragrant, thick, ancient, and let it trail in slow rivulets over Dane's brow. It did not cool him, it only made the moment shine. The knight raised his eyes. He did not look to the heavens, nor to the crowd. He looked to the nave where his daughter once danced, barefoot and laughing, during a festival of light. That memory passed through him like a blade. And then the crown descended, hiss, the sound split the silence like thunder tearing the sky. Smoke lifted in spirals as flesh and iron met. The scent of charred skin soaked the air, and even the torches seemed to flinch. Some in the crowd looked away, others wept. But Dane did not scream. He did not scream. His body shook, but his voice was still. His breath came shallow and ragged, but no cry escaped. Only a soundless oath, mouthed beneath blistered lips, "Let truth be found in flame." The priests lowered him gently, almost reverently, into the chamber beneath the altar, a stone room, windowless, unblessed by time. One torch, one cot, one bowl of water, changed each day, and the crown, hissing softly, cooling slowly, branding the sin or sanctity within his skull. For 3 days he would be watched, not by men, by God. On the first day he bled through the bandages, the wound beneath his ribs darkened, and fever took him. He tossed, murmuring fragments of vows taken long ago, to shield the weak, to bear no falsehood. His fingers clawed at the stone, as if trying to carve truth into its flesh. The guards watched in silence. The torch flickered, the air grew thick. By the second day, he whispered prayers. Not the grand sermons of the high order, no, these were the prayers of childhood. Simple, scared, half-remembered. Light in the shadow, keep the door, and once he called a name. Elira. His daughter's name. The guards stiffened. One of them turned away. That night, a tremor shook the basilica. A candle fell and cracked. The winds howled through the crypt's narrow vents. Some said it was a sign, others called it coincidence. But all remembered it. By the third day, Dane began to sing, not chants, not hymns, lullabies. Soft, broken lullabies, the kind sung beside cradles in times of war, songs of moons and meadows, of fathers returning. His voice was raw, torn by thirst and pain, but it flowed with unbearable tenderness. The iron crown no longer glowed, but its weight had vanished beneath his skin. When the priests entered on the dawn of the 4th day, they found silence. Dane lay still, arms crossed, eyes closed, but not in agony, in peace. The crown had fused to his skull, melding with bone like a grim halo. His skin had blistered, but not blackened. The wound at his side had stopped weeping, and his mouth bore a ghost of a smile. No insects came, no rot crept in. His body, untouched by decay, was sealed within the chapel of Saint Ashrin beneath the basilica. Some called him martyr, others, heretic. But all agreed on one thing: he had not broken. A century later, when civil war tore the kingdom apart, soldiers broke into the chapel in search of gold. What they found was a skeleton, wrapped in velvet shadows. The iron crown still rested upon the skull, shining faintly in the dark. One soldier, a boy of 17, reached out to touch it. He went blind in one eye. From that day on, no hand touched the relic again. The monks say his soul walks the cloisters still, his boots echoing on marble floors, his whisper rising beneath the choirs, not in anger, not in vengeance. In searching for a justice never declared, for a truth the fire could not speak. And each year on the day of the crown, a single candle is left burning before his tomb. Its flame never wavers, even when all others are extinguished. And so the trial ended, but the judgment lingers. For in the age of kings and ashes, where faith and fury hold the same blade, not all who burn are guilty, and not all who kneel are saved. Pause, far beyond the chapel walls as the seasons turn and the veil between realms thins. Another chapter waits. In the marshlands of Calder, a bell tolls without hands. Smoke rises from a ruined abbey, and a rider cloaked in gray carries with him a secret too old for parchment. What was lost in fire may yet return in shadow. At the edge of the marshlands, where the air tastes of iron and moss, the twilight came not with stars, but with silence. The fog clung low like morning veils, brushing the faces of the waiting. Reeds whispered in broken tongues, and somewhere a heron shrieked a thin sound, like a soul being torn in two. The trial of echoes was about to begin. They came in shadows, cloaked not just in wool but in dread, monks with brows like storm clouds, hunters with blood on their sleeves. And at their center, a man who did not kneel, Alaric, his name passed in hushed stories, a priest with a heretical heart, some said, a healer of the sick, a baptizer of infants born under forbidden stars, a speaker of tongues, long buried under burned temples and royal decrees. He had wandered into the outer villages, with a red cloak and a voice that made even the dogs stop barking. He gave no sermons from pulpits. He spoke in doorways, under trees, beside graves, and those who heard him wept not from fear, but from a terrible remembering. So they came for him, not with rope nor chain, but with words, charges, rituals. They brought him to the circle of stones that stood like broken teeth at the marsh's edge, weathered by centuries and blood rites. It was there the sacred test would decide if he was touched by the divine or damned. The creed, they told him, must be spoken, not whispered, not mouthed, spoken with conviction. If the earth echoed him, he was true; if it did not, he was false, and his truth would be buried with his bones. Alaric stood alone, his cloak soaked at the hem with swamp water. Mud climbed his boots like a second skin. He did not tremble, he did not ask mercy. Twilight bled into the fog, and the watchers melted into the tree lines, shadows watching shadows. He drew a breath, and then he spoke. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something older than doctrine. Each word of the creed rose like a song remembered from childhood. His voice did not shake, it rang. But the marsh did not return it. No echo, no response, just the soft glug of shifting waters. The cattails bowed their heads, the reeds held their breath, and the earth, old as sin, stayed mute. The silence was a verdict, but still he stood, and still he stared into the fogas, if listening to something only he could hear. One of the monks, Brother Silas, who had once buried his own child under moonless sky, whispered, "The Lord does not speak through liars." Another, younger, with shaking hands, muttered that the marsh devours the voices of the damned. But not all believed it. Not all could, because something lingered in the air, a weight, a pull, like the moment before a storm breaks. Some said they saw Alaric's breath form words, even after his lips fell still. Others claimed the silence was not empty at all, but full, heavy, watching. Regardless, they buried him beneath the stones. No pyre, no prayers, just the groan of shovels and the splash of disturbed mud. They placed him under the very altar that condemned him, sealing the trial with earth and shame, and they left. But the marsh remembered. Seasons passed, the reeds grew taller, the fog never lifted, and yet, strange things began to stir. Travelers, lost or foolish, would speak of hearing voices on windless nights, not screams, not moans, but prayers, soft, rhythmic, winding through the cattails like lullabies for the forgotten. Some swore they heard the creed itself, whispered by a voice that was not a man's, nor a ghost's, but something between. One woman, a widow fleeing conscription, claimed that as she stumbled through the bog, bleeding and near death, the voice led her to dry ground. "It spoke my name," she said, eyes wide as moons, and it echoed. But echoes do not return in that place. Not for the living. Still the stories grew. They called it the Whispering Marsh. They warned children not to sing there, lest their voice vanish. Some monks began to avoid the sacred circle entirely. The trial of echoes was never repeated. But those who once buried Alaric never forgot his eyes, because in that final moment when the silence had judged him, when the marsh had swallowed his voice, he had not looked afraid. He had looked, relieved, as if the silence had proved something he already knew, as if he had never expected an echo, as if truth did not need to be heard to be real. Now when moonlight skims the water just right, some say the stones weep. Tiny rivulets, like tears, stream down their sides, the kind that don't come from rain, or dew, but memory. Some believe it's the Lord weeping for a justice undone. Others believe it is Alaric himself, still preaching beneath the mud, speaking to the roots and bones of the land, and perhaps that is why no one dares speak there now. Because if your voice does not return to you, what else might listen? The marsh still holds its silence, but it is no longer empty, and though no trial has been held in generations, every so often, a red scrap of cloth is found tied to a reed soft, tattered, like a priest's robe left behind. A quiet rebellion, a tribute, or a warning. The trial of echoes has passed into legend, but legends do not sleep, they breathe, they wait, and somewhere beneath the sacred stones, a voice waits to an ever raised in anger, never silenced by fear, just waiting for someone, anyone, to listen. As the fog thickens, and the stars hide behind their veils, we move deeper into lands where silence has teeth, and faith must walk barefoot through mud and fire. Beyond the marsh, a bell tolls a single chime in the distant hills, and a new chapter begins.